Talk about it some more with former foreign policy advisor for the Obama campaign and former State Department official David Tafuri. David, welcome back. Again, this latest development just coming into the newsroom moments ago. You and I have talked about this, about not trusting Hamas, but do you think this can actually happen and bring some peace to this family, to Edan's family?
Thanks, Hena. This is exciting news for Edan's family, but it's not clear yet whether Hamas is saying they are definitely going to release him now, or they are going to release him as soon as there is a ceasefire agreed to with Israel. And those are two very different things because we don't have a final agreement on a ceasefire. Perhaps this is an inducement by Hamas to try to get Israel to agree to ceasefire terms. Of course, all of this comes as the president of the United States is about to head to the Middle East, and he'll be in the Gulf countries, but we know the subject of Gaza will be top of mind for his meetings. And there will be a presentation likely from the Gulf countries on a plan for Gaza. But remember, we were supposed to, under the other ceasefire terms, get to phase two. And phase two, all of the hostages would be released. But we still have 59 missing, as the mother of Edan just mentioned, and at least 21 of them are still alive. Perhaps as many as 24. We're unsure of the health status of 3 of them. But welcome news that Edan might be released, but let's see the exact terms.
David, what do you make of Netanyahu saying the release by Hamas is a gesture to President Trump's trip to the Middle East? I thought that was an odd thing to say.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I don't know what he means exactly by that. It may very well be. The timing of it suggests that perhaps Hamas did that because they know the president is coming to the Middle East and he'll be putting pressure on the Gulf countries at least to try to mediate a ceasefire. And perhaps Hamas thinks this will remove some of the pressure on them. I think that's unlikely, but it is probably a goodwill gesture. And I'm sure President Trump would welcome this, as all Americans will welcome this.
What do you think this means for the remaining hostages?
I think it just depends on whether there's going to be a ceasefire. Unfortunately, the hostages are leverage to Hamas, as crude as that is to say. They use them as leverage. They're a bargaining chip. And so I don't think Hamas is going to release all of them until it has a ceasefire that it is happy with, and that it has insisted that ceasefire has to mean the withdrawal of all Israeli troops, which Netanyahu has not been willing to agree to in a long-term ceasefire.
This, of course, is only 60% of the population in Gaza is getting that much-needed humanitarian aid. Let's switch gears here, David. High-stakes negotiations wrapping up between China and the U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent spoke about the progress that was made. Here's what he said.
I can tell you that the talks were productive, and I would just conclude with saying it was done in the spirit of cooperation, shared interest, mutual respect, and we look forward to sharing the details with you tomorrow morning.
Look, we know it usually takes a lot more than 2 days to negotiate something like this. It typically takes years. But are we any closer to de-escalating this growing trade war between the largest economies in the world?
There is perhaps no more complex economic relationship than the relationship between the United States and China. So there's a lot to decide and agree upon. Hopefully we will get good news tomorrow, as the Treasury Secretary mentioned. But for investors and for companies that rely upon products from China and vice versa, there is still a great deal of uncertainty over what will the tariffs be. And until you have some certainty, it's really hard to make new deals, to invest in new manufacturing, especially if you rely on parts from China.
Are we closer to de-escalating the growing trade war with China? I mean, do you think they will finally come to the table?
I'm not sure. It didn't look that way a few days ago, but I have to take, Secretary Bessent at, face value that he is hopeful that this can be resolved in a way that's positive for American companies and for the American economy. But there's a lot to be worked out. And I don't think China is going to concede on all of the things that we want them to concede on, including treating American companies fairly, not stealing intellectual property from American companies. Those are also important points outside the tariffs, but related to the tariffs.
Let's move on to the Ukrainian Russia conflict. Ukrainian President Zelensky hoping for a ceasefire with Russia. It's supposed to start tomorrow. He's saying he, quote, will be waiting for Putin in Turkey personally to speak with him on Thursday. This is a huge development. This also just happened a few hours ago. Will Zelensky meet with Putin if there's no ceasefire tomorrow?
So this is more good news, potentially. I'm here in Kyiv, in the capital of Ukraine, and there was a visit yesterday by some of the biggest supporters of Ukraine, the leaders of the UK, France, Germany, and Poland. And they were very united in their message in saying that Russia needs to agree to a ceasefire, which would start tonight, by the way, at the end of the three-day ceasefire that Putin announced. And those four leaders have threatened Russia with new sanctions, and they said that President Trump of the United States is going to support them on that. So Putin is facing potentially significant more sanctions if he does not agree to a 30-day ceasefire that President Zelensky has demanded. Separately, Putin has said he wants to meet with Zelensky in Turkey, and we saw what President Zelensky said. He's ready to meet with Putin. It's not clear, though, from what Zelensky said, whether he will meet with him under any circumstances or whether he will only meet with him if Putin agrees to that 30-day ceasefire Zelensky has demanded with support from the European countries. And Putin has not yet agreed to that, saying he wants some other concessions, including he wants a cessation of the provision of weapons from the EU countries and the United States to Ukraine, which is very unlikely to happen.
Another conflict to talk about on this Sunday. Top U.S. and Iranian officials wrapped up the fourth round of nuclear talks today. It happened in Oman. This comes ahead of President Trump's and Secretary Rubio's trip to the Middle East this week. This is the president's first foreign trip in his second term. The U.S. pushing for Iran to dismantle its nuclear sites. David, how likely is that to happen? We've been trying this for decades.
Well, President Trump is saying he wants full dismantlement by Iran, which is a lofty goal and one that would benefit the world if it were to be able to be achieved. President Trump will be talking to the Gulf countries about this, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Qatar. He's visiting the capitals of each of those countries, and each of those countries also feel it is very important for Iran's nuclear program to be dismantled. The question is, what is Iran demanding in return? And does it involve some of the things that President Trump said he won't give and some of the things that were given in the JCPOA agreement that was agreed to by President Obama and Iran that President Trump has always criticized, like sanctions relief, like providing frozen funds that Iran wants back, and some other things. And so we don't know yet what concessions Iran has made. Will it go all the way to meet President Trump's demands?
David Tafuri, thanks for your time. Stay safe in Kyiv. We hope to talk to you soon. Thank you again.
Thanks, Hena.
And we're going to